Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Deep Blue Rediscovered video series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and this is actually a little introduction to Game 2 from the 1997 match, Deep Blue against Garry Kasparov. Whilst I was going through the video, it suddenly struck me that it would be a lot more enjoyable with a little bit of background knowledge on the Ruy Lopez, but to include all that information in the video would make it very long, and we do have to think about Mr. Beads' attention span. So what I've done in this video is just to give a quick overview of some of the key Ruy Lopez positions, and hopefully that's going to make the game, Deep Blue against Garry Kasparov, fantastic game, make that just a little bit clearer. So let's have a look how we reach this position, which is hopefully a very familiar position, one of the main lines in all of chess: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6. No open Ruy Lopez, which is knight takes e4. No modern systems like the Archangel b5 or the Tkachev Archangel with b5 and bishop c5. Just the good old rook e1 and then d6. No Marshall Gambit with castles and d5. Just d6, c3, castles, and now h3. So in the game Deep Blue-Kasparov, Garry played h6, but actually it led to positions very similar to the Chigorin system of the Ruy Lopez, and actually a number of themes that we see in the Deep Blue-Kasparov game, well, we can just demonstrate very effectively by looking at some slightly different lines. So let's start with that. So knight a5, bishop c2, c5, this is the good old-fashioned main line. What's the idea of this really? Well, I mean, you gain queenside space, of course, with black, and also, you know, this whole setup with the pawns having been played to a6 and b5, the black pawn on c7 and the knight on c6 in front of it. It feels a little bit ugly, feels wrong somehow. So playing knight a5 rather, bishop c2, c5, it brings well, these pawns abreast with each other, allows the knight to retreat back behind pawn cover, just feels a lot more natural. So after d4, queen c7, knight bd2, black's got a lot of possibilities. You can take on d4 to avoid the position becoming too closed, but knight c6 is quite a common line. Indeed, it's a line that I played a lot when I was quite little. Now Bobby Fischer in these positions used to play the old Ragozin, the old Ragozin or the Rouser, I'm not sure actually. It's one of those two guys' attacks, and then knight f1, and the idea really is to expose this d5 square, and you can play moves like knight h2, queen f3, knight e3, aim for knight d5, and exchange off the protection of d5 with knight g4. It's quite an awkward system, but in the end black found some good responses to it. I always liked it as white, to be honest, but yeah, it's nothing absolutely special. Nowadays the engines prefer the move d5, and well, this is very much Anatoly Karpov's favourite as well, and undoubtedly the strongest move. So after d5, black's got to decide what to do with that knight. The move knight d8 was well, really made popular, or at least became part of a real plan, a real system, thanks to the great player Rubenstein, who came up with a very interesting scheme of development. So white plays a4, attacking the queen side, rook b8. Yes, the only move you can make really to keep your pawn structure intact, but that means that white gains the a file potentially. Can't make any use of it yet, but yeah, can be irritating for black. And a very normal follow-up after taking on b5 like this is to play the move b4. What is the idea of b4? Well, b4 is putting pressure on the pawn, also fixing this pawn on b5 so we can attack it later. And here black's really got to decide, how are you going to develop with your pieces? Where are you going to put all your stuff? Because actually black's a little bit short of space. I mean, this pawn on d5 is rather awkward. This pawn on b4 is sort of stopping these queenside pawns from expanding. And well, what are you going to do with your knight on d8, for example? Now, what Rubenstein came up with was a very interesting plan. He came up with the idea of knight e8. And the main idea of that was to regroup the pieces, to go g6 and f6 in actual fact, and then go knight g7 and knight f7. Very, very nice. And then eventually break like f5 with f5, sort of King's Indian style. Now I'm going to show you a few famous games in this line, just to show you the dangers. Actually, Chessable sent round a mail, and there was also, I think, a Twitter tweet as well, but just sort of saying, oh God, you don't want to play this sort of position, just as an advertisement for one of the other Ruy Lopez systems, the Open, I think. But it is just a little bit tricky for black. But yeah, I do find it incredibly beautiful, this idea. And yeah, I mean, Rubenstein was really ahead of his time, because these sort of manoeuvres, this sort of grand conceptions weren't common, in that era. So I want to show you first of all a game between John Nunn and Nigel Short that made quite an impression on me, and I'll tell you the exact reason why. It was also a stunning game. So after knight to f1, Nigel played the move c4, and this is very, very early indeed to play this move c4, and it's generally reckoned to be an extremely bad move. Why is that? Well, I mean, what are you actually gaining from it? It's not really clear, and the one thing that you're losing from it is that this diagonal is open, so white will be able to play bishop e3 and threaten to invade with rook a7. Now that doesn't actually happen in this game, but you'll definitely see it in another game. The other thing as well is that black loses any possibility of maybe creating a bit of disruption on the queen side with c takes b4. But yeah, so after knight f1, c4, c4, the Doc actually didn't do anything on the queen side. He played actually very aggressively on the king side here. Knight g7, rook f1, bishop d7 and f4. And well, I think the speed of this really caught Nigel by surprise. I mean, actually, white's looking for stuff like f5 here, just and then you've got a massive space advantage on the king side and also on the queen side as well. So not looking too pretty. And well, Nigel reacted quite firmly, you could say, with bishop h4 and then f5. But this all turned out horribly wrong for him. So f takes e5. I mean, I don't think Nigel played this particularly well, but the finish was very pleasing. Knight g4. You don't want to give the Doc these positions. I mean, in his heyday, phenomenal attacker, brilliant tactician. I've lost a few very nice tactical games to him, and well, this was horrible. The rook making use of the a file, coming across to the king side, and after hg, rook g6, knight g7, rook takes g7. Black resigned because well, a lot of bad stuff is happening on the king side. I think the key point was there, check, and then if king h6, we go queen h4 and queen h7 checkmate. So that was absolutely disastrous, and it really struck me because, funnily enough, just a few months, maybe even just a few weeks earlier, I was present as an 11-year-old at a training weekend. I think actually the only training weekend from the British Federation that I've ever attended, the only training weekend I ever got offered. But with Nigel Short, actually, together with a bunch of maybe 20, 25 English juniors, and all of the best juniors were there. Some names very familiar, like Michael Adams, and I think Julian Hodgson as well, actually. although he wasn't really a junior, was he, at the time? Stuart Conquest, I think, certainly. Also Ali Mortazavi, who some of you may know, and James Cavendish was a very promising young player. Didn't pursue chess after a while, but he was at 2350 or something with a couple of IM norms, I think, and a host of other very strong juniors. And Nigel actually played a clock simul on the last day, which was a pretty tough undertaking, I have to say, for him. And I got this position as black, and against him, well, I decided that the one thing that black should never do is to play the move c5 to c4. And well, I mean, I actually drew fairly convincingly. I played the move g6, bishop h6, knight g7. Knight g3 f6, knight d2, bishop d7, not at all playing c4, never ever. So Nigel took on c5, went c4, and I played b4, bishop a4, knight f7. Nigel took everything off, but actually he wasn't able to make any inroads at all, and yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely fine in this position. Was a little bit unlucky, I think, for Nigel, that he just got some sort of position where you know, I could hold very easily as an 11-year-old. I was very good. I was extremely tough like that. I was never going to do anything too stupid, and well, we agreed to draw something like 10 moves later. But somewhat surprising somehow to me, when I saw Nigel's game, that I'd steadfastly avoided playing c4. I sort of thought that maybe Nigel had been inspired by my game to play this against the dock. Might not be true, of course. But then he did it in a way that I absolutely did not want to do. The interesting thing is that you know, the engines, as always, give some fascinating insights into this. They actually think that g6 is not a good move. Why is that? Because white can play well, either bishop h6, that's possible, or just takes, and then c4. This is the move that the engines want. And actually, what they consider that if black plays b4, this is very, very bad for black. What they really want, they always want to meet this move c4 with knight d6, to be able to play something like knight b5 and get the knight into d4. That's the basic idea. But of course, some slight problem here is that yeah, this pawn on e5 is hanging, so it's not a good moment to play knight d6 in this particular position. So what the engines actually prefer is to play the move, if you're going to play this line, is to play the move f6, because then if you go takes and c4, you can play knight d6. There we are. The e5 pawn is protected, and Leela sees it as just 0.21 for white. So Leela's not at all upset about this position at all. You know, so that's actually quite interesting there. And yeah, I mean, Leela was also quite keen on going takes and c4 straight away. But again, you play f6, and if cb5, you go knight d6 and take off this pawn with a knight. And again, Leela sort of thought that this was quite decent for black. You know, black can also just take its time and play bishop d7 takes b5 as well. So quite interesting. But this move knight e8, yeah, the engines do think that that white is better there. Interestingly enough, what the engines want to do, Leela and Stockfish, they want to play the move knight b7. And what's the idea of this? This knight is going back to d8 later, but first of all, the engines want to play the rooks to well, either to c8 and b8 or to a8 and b8. Get the rooks challenging for the a file before slipping the knight back afterwards. They basically consider that you should be challenging for the a file and you shouldn't be cutting yourself off like that. So knight f1, bishop d7, bishop e3, and we're actually following a very famous game here. Bishop e3 is not Leela's favourite move, or Stockfish's either, but let's just follow this very famous game. I won't say what it is yet, but you'll maybe have a guess. Actually, black is doing quite decently up till here. Knight g3, bishop f8, rook a2. And now a somewhat dodgy move from black, although it's not completely disastrous in this position, because black's actually quite well organised with the rooks like that. Black played the move c4, no particular reason to play it. Stockfish just thinks, likes the move rook a2, queen a2, and just rook b8 waiting, and you're just going to go queen c8 and threaten to go rook a8. That's perfectly good. But c4 was played, and then white played the move bishop b1, which is a little bit odd. Bishop b2 does indeed feel better, because after all you'll be able to double up on the a file much more easily. But white played bishop b1, and now black made a huge mistake here. And when I show you the white's next move after black's huge mistake, you may recognize the game. So what Stockfish wanted to do was rook a2 takes, and then this move knight e8, and actually just move the knights not to f7 and g7, but to b7 and c7, and then just play rook a8 and challenge for the a file. And it's all right. It's just a small disadvantage for black. What black did in this position was to play queen d8, and then one of the most famous moves I think ever seen was played in this position. If you don't know it, then try and work it out. If you do know it, well done. It's bishop a7, and this is the game Karpov against Unzicker. And this move bishop a7 is incredibly beautiful. Basically you block the a file, so black can't do very much on it. And because black hasn't exchanged off a pair of rooks, it's all of black's major pieces blocked behind this bishop on a7, which makes black very, very passive. Now, obviously, Unzicker didn't play it in the very best way. What Karpov did here was just get organized and double up behind the rook. Queen e7, bishop b1, not taking any, having any rush at all. Just you're going to be ready to triple up if necessary. Bishop e8, knight e2, knight d8, knight h2. I think you can see what's coming, and now the move f4. Not necessarily what the engines wanted to do right at this moment, but you recognise what happened in the John Nunn against Nigel Short game, and you see, playing on both sides really of the board, a very common way of playing against this line. So Unzicker really should have taken on f4, but he let himself get squashed with f6, and then f5 happened, and this is one of the most appalling positions I've ever seen for black. I mean, h6, I don't know what you don't know what, sometimes as black you just don't know what you're doing. This is very nice, just rooks here to here, so you could even just play queen a1 after. Knight g4. I think this is really one of those positions where you say, everything that you could have you get. Queen g6, knight h5, and Unzicker resigned. This famous game, Karpov Unzicker, Nice, Olympiad 1974. So, quite horrible. Black could have done a lot better, but you see this this idea of playing on both sides there. One last interesting thing is that Lila, as one of its slightly lower moves, was looking at the idea of knight d7 coming round to b6, which was extremely interesting, I thought. Never seen it before, but that knight could come either to a4, supported by bishop on d7, or c4 even. Yeah, very, very interesting. Looked at this position many times with black. That never occurred to me, which is just always so lovely about working with engines. Just one final game that I want to show to you. It's a very famous game. It's Fischer against Boris Spassky from their 1992 return match, and a rather different system. The Breyer, which was Spassky's favourite. Again, it's very, very logical there. This knight not well placed on c6, so you bring it back to b8 to d7. You've got the advantage that your knight on d7 is much better placed than on a5, for example. It's a very solid system indeed, this all works quite well, all very well known. This c5, d5 played c4, and now white played b4, and now strange enough, Spassky didn't take on b3, which is really very natural indeed. I mean, it's kind of the point, right? I mean, you get this knight on c5. At some stage you'll probably try and bring this bishop back to d7. But Spassky didn't do this, and then you're into this typical sort of system here. And what Fischer did was extremely impressive strategically. Yeah, you know, he wasn't the same player that he was 20 years before, but he still knew his strategy, and he played this idea: rook a3 and rook ea1 and rook a2 and queen c1 and queen a1. And the key point is about this this maneuver is that white is delaying taking on b5. It's sort of a potentially open file, the A file. You know, you could open it immediately, but then black would have time to organize himself, swap off first one pair of rooks and the second pair of rooks. By delaying the opening, but knowing that you can always open it whenever you want to, white's making it much more difficult for black to fight the A file. And actually, Fischer took it an extra step here, because he didn't even capture straight away. He just played this move knight b1, and the idea, actually, his idea was that he was going to take off, then he's going to swap off all the rooks, the queens as well, and then afterwards, with this bishop on a8, he's just going to play knight a3, and the b5 pawn can't be defended. Absolutely beautiful strategy from Fischer there, and well, Spassky played the desperate, you could say, but also very typical sacrifice. He's done this before, most notably against Judith Polgar in a match game. This sort of sacrifice, where you sacrifice your knight for a couple of central pawns and a pawn roller, but this was not enough. I mean, actually, the A file was very, very powerful for white, and Spassky didn't really last that long. He kept things going for a while, but Fischer played it pretty beautifully, actually, and won an excellent game. So that is a little bit of background on the Ruy Lopez, and well, you are going to see loads of these things coming back. The A file, the potentially opened file, the F4 break on the king side, playing on both sides. Yeah, you're going to see it all over the place. Yeah, you know, I just think that hopefully this will make your enjoyment of that classic game even better, just by having that extra knowledge. And obviously, if you knew it before, well then, great, well done. And I hope this was a nice refresh. And otherwise, well, now it's time to get down to this iconic game, Deep Blue against Kasparov, second match game, 1997.